Hey guys, today on 2 by Jeep, we're welding our pinch seams. So on the older JKs, I think they changed it around 2012. But on the older JKs, where your body panel met your inner fender, they overlap and there's spot welds that go all along the seam. So the contour of your body line right behind your fender kind of folds in and then it straightens out flat, and that's where the inner fender meets it. And it's about an inch or an inch and a half that sticks out, and that's where all the welds are. And you'll see it if you look at your body. Really, it goes all the way around your body. So when you're running big tires, unless you have a really big lift, you need to trim that pinch seam because when your suspension articulates, it'll drive your tire right into that seam, and you can take a gash out of your tire, or you could potentially do some pretty hefty damage to both the body and the tire. Also, if you've got a Rubicon with stock rock sliders, or you have any other model with Rubicon rock sliders, you're going to need to trim those too. So we're going to do that today. We're running 37-inch tires on a 3.5-inch lift. When we had our 35s, it was real close at full articulation, but we had our our bump stops set. With the 37s, I don't want to set larger bump stops because I'll lose some of that articulation off-road. So we're going to trim them up and then weld the sheet metal. If you can't weld sheet metal, you've got a couple options. You can just kind of bang it over, peen it over with a hammer and flatten it out. Or I've heard some people talk about cutting it and then just filling up the seam with JB Weld. There is a little bit of a pucker in it, and when I cut that off, I'm not sure if that's just extra material that's folded over or if there's going to be a big hole. If there is a big hole, we'll see. We'll either patch it, just cut a piece of sheet metal and weld it in there, or we might take a hammer and dolly and fold it over. So we'll see. Okay, so this is the pinch seam right here that we were talking about. So, I don't know, the light is not particularly great in here, but you can see the body comes in this way, and it's got a little corner here, and this is the flat spot where the inner fender is welded. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 spot welds right here. I'm going to trim most of it. You can see there's another body line. Let's see in here. Right, so you've got your inner fender, the inside of your body, like the tub, right, of the body, and then your outer body panel. So I'm probably going to start right about here and come this way. I'm going to pull the rock slider off too, and separately I'm going to cut this a little shorter and weld a cap on there. We'll do that some other time. And this right here, that's that little kind of dimple I was talking about. It looks like it's open. When I cut there, hopefully I'll just be able to tap it in and close it up. But we will see. I don't know why they did that. But we'll see. Okay, so here it is. We've got, I took a decent chunk out, cut it out with a cutoff wheel, and then used a flap disc, just an aggressive flap disc to smooth it out and give it a kind of a nicer contour. So coming down right here, we cut all this away, and then there was a corner here that we cut off at an angle. I did a really rough cut on the rock sliders, just to give me room, but again, they're coming off, and I'm going to weld them up and make them look all pretty. That little thing there, that bump that I didn't know what was inside of it, there's some foam in there. It's here, right here, and it's either it's probably mostly for vibration, or it could be that they had an opening there, and they just put it in there so in case there was an opening in the pinch seam, dirt and salt and everything else couldn't get in. But I'm guessing they probably had a reason to do it. I don't know what that reason was. But it looks like we can just do a little hammer and dolly work and tap that down and close it up. So it's got most of the paint and primer off of this side. It's tough to get it off of that side, but it'll be okay. It's clean enough to weld up. Okay, we're going to start welding that up. I closed up that gap pretty well. There's a little bit of a small gap left, but I can get that with some filler rod. Welding, we'll be using oxygen acetylene and the Smith Little torch. Someday I'll make a video on why oxygen acetylene welding is so wonderful. But Smith Little torch is great for welding sheet metal. It's really light, it's small. You basically hold it like a pencil if you want. Much easier than using a large normal welding torch. We're just going to start with a number 5 tip and see how that does. I might have to drop down to a number 4. This sheet metal is a lot thicker than I thought it was going to be. It looks, where I grounded it actually, it looks like it's 16 gauge or some equivalent to that. I'm kind of skeptical that it is. I might just have a little bit of a burr left. But either way, we'll start on that. I'm not going to actually film the welding because you won't be able to see anything with the light, but we'll see how it comes out. Okay, here it is. The reason it looks so thick, and I would have known if I had just looked right up here, we have 3 body panels coming together here. We've got your quarter panel, the fender well, and then the floor. They all come together right here. And after I ground it, or cut it, and then ground it, it looked like 2, but it was 3, so that's why it was so thick. Right here, from about here to here, I don't know how well you can see it, that's really what you want. This looks a little rough, and this looks kind of rough, because I had to use some filler rod there. Normally, when I'm welding sheet metal, I don't use any filler rod. You use a little filler rod to start, just to get your puddle formed, and then if you do it correctly, you really don't need any more unless you blow a hole or your seam opens up. I had to use a bunch down here because when I bent this in to close up that gap, the gap was down here, but I had to do a little work up here too. There wasn't enough material here, so you ended up with these 2 panels coming together, and then this quarter panel where it met was about 1/8 of an inch lower. So when I welded them all together, I ended up blowing a small hole here and kind of burning back the edge of this panel. It's a very awkward angle, kind of tough to get at. So I had to fill it in a little bit there. So I'll just clean up the edge with a flap disc, and we'll stick some paint on it, move on to the other side. But okay, we're on the other side. Just like on the passenger side, we're going to start right about where this spot weld is, come in about 1 inch, come down, put a radius here. This is where I did a rough cut when I first put the tires on. So we're going to pick up over 1.5 inches right here of clearance, and then about 1 inch up here. I did learn a few lessons from the other side. I'm going to cut less off, and then I'm going to close up this gap that's in here before I cut the rest, just so I have more material to work with. And we're really not shrinking this, we're just kind of folding it down. So, ideally, if we had the time and the room, we'd try to shrink the metal when we brought it in, but I'm just going to kind of bang it down. And then inside here, starting right about here, on the other side, after I cut it, actually when I started welding it, I found that there's some material in here, and it's similar to, if you ever pull the body off of like a Model A, along the frame, between the frame and the body, there's those strips of fabric. and it's kind of the same deal. It looked just like it. It's really like a coarse, kind of thick woven fabric, and it's kind of the same in there. I had a few strands sticking out. So I'm going to cut this. I'm going to spread these apart just a little bit, try to get rid of as much of that as I can, over here before I weld it up so it doesn't burn and smell bad. Another thing, when I was welding the other side, if you end up welding these, make sure you've got a fan going. There was a pretty strong zinc smell, which kind of smelled like when you weld galvanized, which is not the best thing to breathe in. I'm guessing it's because of the zinc in the primer, but just make sure you've got decent ventilation when you're welding this stuff up. So let's cut it and see how she comes out. Okay, so I just closed up that gap there. It's before I cut anything. Again, I wanted plenty of material. I don't think you can really see it very well through the camera, but it's nice and tight here now. I had plenty of material to go in, and I took my time. I was able to shrink it so there's no real folds in the metal. It does look a little rough. We just moved, and all my body hammers are in a box somewhere. So I had a dolly, but I was just using a small ball peen, the flat side of a ball peen, to try to hammer this side. So it's not quite as smooth as it would have been with a body hammer, but for this area it really doesn't matter. Any little divots the primer will fill in, and then you're not really going to see it anyways. So that's nice and tight now. I cleaned out all the crud that was in there. There was a little bit of foam, plus there's a bunch of just dirt and grime, because that hole is wide open normally. So I cleaned it out, I blew it out with air, and now we'll cut and weld, and it should come out real nice. Went over it with the flap disc, smoothed it out, got a nice radius down here. I did close up this gap a little more, and it's actually, the way I had to do it, it comes down straight and then it's sort of turning out this way, just a smidge. I just got to keep an eye on that when I weld it up. But it looks pretty smooth, it looks good overall. I'm going to take off as much paint as I can, and then we'll weld it up, see how it comes out. Looks pretty good. Smidge lumpy, but we can take a file to it in a few spots before we paint. So let's toss the tires on and go find some rocks. Found a stump, which is good enough. If we come in, you can see we got plenty of room. I don't think we could hit the pinch seam if we tried. So I think we're all set.